We were just chatting about your journey in quitting vaping, and I would love for you to kind of describe that process for you, why you started, what it was like, what got you into it. I think the audience would really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think this is something a lot of people are struggling with right now, whether openly or secretly. Vaping is kind of this epidemic that's taken over all different populations. And when you're like, why did you start? I think that's a logical question. Why somebody who's 35 years old, never had a nicotine addiction in your life, why would you ever pick up vaping? I mean, vaping is something that we kind of, I think, associate with teenagers, which is so sad because they're the most impressionable ones, sucking on this cotton candy pen. And the reason I picked up the vape was because, it was like, just like any other thing, you slowly kind of get exposed to it more and more. So I would be out with people and somebody always had a pen. And I'm kind of curious. I've always been a curious person. I wanted to see what it felt like. So I tried. I'm like, whatever. Try it again a couple times. And then I think it was after I had gone through my divorce and I was like, I wasn't drinking. I didn't have anything. I felt like I needed something to take the edge off that wasn't going to be like super consequential. Like I didn't have time for a hangover. I didn't have time for, anything, any major drugs. So I was like, I'll just take like a hit of a weed pen. Maybe it'll give me a little relief. And it's interesting because it's like what I probably needed was just like a deep breath, not to suck on, a little vape pen. The strength and the amount of nicotine that enters your bloodstream when you're smoking a vape is so much stronger and higher than if you were taking a hit of a cigarette. And I don't think people are aware of that at first when they start. I think everybody thinks they're the exception to the rule, that, I'm not going to become addicted to nicotine. I've taken drags of cigarettes, my whole life, whatever. And I would never pick up smoking cigarettes. Who would ever do that? That's so stupid. But you don't realize when your brain is flooded with the dopamine and the serotonin and the adrenaline and everything that nicotine gives you, you don't realize that it's not a choice at that point. This is your actual physiological makeup. This is the chemistry in your body. So you take the hit and then I don't know. I think it's different for some people. For me, I was so surprised because how quickly I became very addicted to it really fast. Like it just kind of leaves you with this hollow, empty feeling that can only be satiated by another hit. And it's so easy to take a hit of a vape because you can do it. You can literally do it in the bathroom and on an airplane. You can do it. You can hide it anywhere because it doesn't smell. And it was I felt like I had a little secret and it was kind of fun. It was fun to have something that I could just like, in between podcasts, I could go to the bathroom and take a hit and feel like I was like, it gives you like a little bump of energy. If you feel tired, you take a hit. If you feel sad, you take a hit. If you feel bored, you take a hit. It was the answer to everything. And it was slowly making me, my baseline self, super anxious. So I knew that I had to make a change. And this took a year. This was a year. I started in February of 2023, and I quit in February of 2024.
And I think people may be surprised to look at somebody like yourself. Like we were talking off air that you have this podcast where you talk about your biohacking routine, you're fasting on Mondays, you do all these things to make yourself healthy and promote health to others. But we all have these things, I think, that we're constantly working on. So talk about like the balance there between being somebody who's super health conscious while also like having this kind of skeleton in your closet.
I think it's very common for people to feel ashamed of the parts of ourselves that don't line up with the person that we want to show the world and the person that we strive to be. Like I am a very health conscious person. It doesn't mean all my choices are healthy. It doesn't mean I don't have a part of myself that tries to self-sabotage or that wants the easiest answer, the quickest solution, or that wants to just be bad or do an impulsive thing. I think it depends on your personality. I think it depends on where you're at in your life and what you're going through, whether or not you can always be consistent with your highest standard for yourself. I love everything in the biohacking world. I am the person that's like, I go to cryo and I make my own bone broth and I do all the IVs and the supplements. And I love that. And I love feeling my healthiest during that time in my life, I did not give a flying fuck. I wanted to feel good. I wanted to feel good right away. And I didn't care what it was going to cost, because I felt like so many things in my life had been taken from me all at once. It was after my divorce. And with that leaves kind of a lifestyle that you like, more of a solitary lifestyle that I wasn't like, I don't think I was fully prepared for. And I think I was trying to avoid having to sit with some of the feelings. So rather than turn to something like alcohol or drugs, or which nicotine is a drug, but for me, I was like, this is the best choice of the bad choices, which ended up being, that's, I think is one of the most dangerous things about vape, is that it seems kind of harmless because it's so ubiquitous. Everybody's doing it. You see it everywhere, but it's actually one of the most harmful, because the effects are so cumulative and they're so intense. And once you're hooked, it is very hard to use strictly willpower to quit. It's almost impossible, actually, to quit nicotine without some kind of outside source. Not very many people can do it.
I believe on our first podcast, we talked about addiction, and you talked about how you had some like substance stuff when you were younger. Like, how did this stack up to that?
Yeah, so I think that was one of the reasons too why I picked it up, because I knew that I had the ability to quit things. I know myself, and I know when I was younger, I was experimental at a young age with alcohol and drugs. And there had been times in my life where I'd taken it too far and had to reel it in and cut things out of my life that don't serve me anymore. And, my relationship with alcohol is an interesting one, because I think at this point in my life, what I've realized is during certain times in your life, you can have a different relationship with a substance, and it can look different, and it can be a really big deal, and it can be all consuming. And then when situations in your life change, it can be a non-issue. Now alcohol for me is something like, I don't really drink because I don't like the way it makes me feel, but I don't have that relationship with it where it's like where I'm trying to use it as a solution or an escape. But I know that I can get to a place like that with alcohol. So that was one of the reasons why, when I was in that hard spot after my divorce, I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to touch alcohol because I know where that can go. But it's just, nicotine is just another drug. It's another way for people to kind of get that artificial sense of wholeness and feeling full that cannot be satiated by any drug. And anytime you think that something can do that for you, other than really sitting with your emotions and turning towards spirituality or turning towards talk therapy or whatever it is to release that. Anytime you try to fill that void, it always comes with a very, very dark consequence.
Yeah. And it's interesting because for me, like as somebody, I smoked cigarettes hardcore from like age, I think like 18 till 21. And then a little bit after I got out of jail. And it was always like an enhancer. It was always like you would like snort a bunch of coke and then you would like smoke a cigarette.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
It was never like something you did like on its own to get some sort of rush. Cause I often, look back and I was like, what did cigarettes really do for me other than you kind of look cool and you become addicted to it? And it's something you did when you were consuming other substances. But I guess from hearing what you just shared about vaping, feels like because of how potent the nicotine is and when you vape, you kind of get that intense rush where you don't need another substance. Am I correct?
Yeah, it speeds up the whole process of what you just said. Like vaping is like cigarettes on steroids, which I think is counterintuitive because it doesn't smell and and you don't have to light it. It's not carcinogenic in that way, but it is worse because you're consuming so much more of the drug and it makes you so much more addicted. I don't know that it didn't make me high. That's the interesting thing about like a nicotine addiction, which I think a lot of people never are able to get there with cigarettes. But with vaping, like it doesn't make you high. It just makes you feel calm because you're so anxious from the chemical deficit that's left by your body withdrawing from the nicotine from your past puff.
Right. And you mentioned your divorce. And I know like you had the reality TV show come out, after the divorce. And that was like the first time where that was all, I don't want to say exposed, that's not the right word, but I would say like all eyes on you with what happened with your marriage and the contract you and your ex-husband, and like what impacted the reality TV show and having all your stuff out there for the world to see, your ability to deal with your mental health that led to you picking up something like vaping?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because it just shows me people are just so different. For me, having my business at other people's disposal to hear and to talk about whatever, it doesn't really bother me. That's why I have a podcast. That's why I had a reality show. Like, I don't really feel that I have anything to be ashamed about in the way that my life has taken its twists and turns. And I think that one of the things that I am best at and that I like to offer people is that none of us should ever be ashamed of the stories that is our past. We can use that information and learn from it and make better choices for ourselves for the future. And then sometimes like we just don't, like picking up the vaping, it's like, did I know better? For sure. That's not something like I learned a valuable lesson. Like sometimes we just do stupid things, but I also don't feel ashamed or embarrassed to tell that story because people do stupid things all the time they know better about. And then we live with the consequences of it. And I just found this one was an interesting one to share because I was able to get on the other side of it. I know so many people are struggling to do that, and it is possible. And it was harder than I thought it would be.
What was the process like of like getting off of it?
Trying to put it down and then walking away and then realizing, oh my God, this is so unbearable. Feeling like it's never the right time because you really need to carve out a chunk of time to feel depressed and like shit and anxious and angry. And I have 2 little kids. I don't have time to not be, Mary Poppins. And so I asked my doctor, is there anything that can assist with curbing some of these side effects? Because the side effects really are like, first you feel a little anxious, then you feel really irritable. And that lasts for like a week. And then for me, I just picked it back up again because it was the easiest thing to do. And it never felt like it was the right time. But I asked my doctor and he was like, you can try Wellbutrin, which is it's actually a drug for anxiety, but it helps people to curb the withdrawal symptoms a little bit. So I went on that. I waited about 2 weeks for that to kick in. And then I just put it down. And this was like, and I think they say it takes the average person like at least 10 times to quit nicotine because the amount of times I had put down the pen and then end up like fishing it out of the trash or like going and just buying a new one. It's embarrassing. But I really, really did not want to be a vapor. It was not my look. It was not my brand. It was not what I wanted to do with my life. And I don't like being a slave to anything. So first things first, I really wanted to stop. I went on the Wellbutrin that helped to curb the symptoms. I put it down and I gave myself 2 weeks of permission to feel like shit and to not make any plans and to like allow myself to feel depressed. And I was like, I know that this is chemical. I think it's good to remind yourself when you're in that state, like you think this is me, I'm just depressed. Like I'm a depressed person. Like, no, you're not. This is a chemical withdrawal and you will feel better. Just reminding yourself you will feel better. You will feel better. And nothing feels better than also the freedom of knowing that you're going to get on the other side and not have something that you need to rely on anymore. So that was really motivating for me.
What message do you have for people? Like, what was the message to your audience who I'm sure related a lot to your story as far as if somebody is like listening to this or they're watching this and they're struggling with vaping, like what's your message?
Number one thing is if you want to quit, you can. And there will be a period of time where you're going to suffer. You don't have to suffer forever, and it's not going to kill you. You just have to know that you will get on the other side of that. If you plan for a period of time to kind of suffer and distract yourself, which I was just like watching TV, binge, that sort of thing, giving yourself permission to eat food that you wouldn't normally let yourself eat, trying to do things that will give you a little bit of a natural dopamine hit, like working out, not eating too much junk food. But I'm just saying, don't be so hard on yourself for everything else. You need to give yourself a little bit of a break during that time period. Also, there's drugs that can help you curb some of these symptoms. And then one thing that I want to warn against is using any kind of a nicotine alternative, like a patch. I mean, it's not a nicotine alternative. It's just the facility in which you get it is alternative, because the patch actually is more nicotine concentrated directly through your skin, direct to your bloodstream, higher doses of nicotine for a consistent long amount of time. So those leave you more addicted to nicotine. They say most people who go on anything like a patch or a gum end up going back to the original way that they were getting the nicotine because it doesn't do anything for the actual addiction. There's actually a book too that I loved called Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Quit Smoking is what it's called. And that's an Audible. I've listened to it on audio. And that was really interesting because it kind of frames your mind around what's actually happening. I think when we can kind of make it less of a part of us and we identify with it less and just know that this is literally a chemical thing that's happening in our brain, this is not who we are, it's easier to get past some of those harder feelings that it brings up.
And so what have been like some of the, like, I know for me, when I quit drugs, you know, one of the things that really helped me was like implementing like healthy habits that stuck so that I could find an alternative for when I had a craving or for when I got stressed to like turn to something else that ended up becoming like a routine for me that ended up transforming my life, was building these healthy disciplines. Obviously, you're somebody that's always, or, you know, you prioritize your health as is. Was there any other like adjustments you had to make in your routine that kind of helped you get past this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely being more thoughtful about how I'm scheduling my time. When you're trying to just survive and get past the initial withdrawal symptoms, which is like 2 weeks, it really allowed me to realize how some of the time that I didn't have structured well could allow me to relapse into smoking again. So making sure that my day is filled with it, even if it's like for these 2 hours, you're going to watch TV. So just like being more intentional about how I'm spending my time. Of course, yes, working out all the time. I worked out every single day because you need to give your body as many of those happy like endorphins and dopamine as possible. Doing things like a cold plunge to give your body some hormetic stress, just ways to kind of curb falling into a depression. So now you're building your body's natural dopamine that's been depleted because your body is like, where's the nicotine? I was relying on that to give me my hit. Also, I think people are, I don't like to say this because I think people get scared, but I gained some weight after I quit. I think it's a very common symptom. I think most people do. But the good news is that it balances back out. So I quit in February. It's, I don't know, what's the month right now? September. So 2 months after I quit, I was like, wait, why does nothing fit me? And then like a few months later, everything is back to normal. So that is something that will happen. And it's just because nicotine also messes with your hormones, your endocrine system. Oh my God, my skin was so bad. Everything got so much better after that. And now I don't even like, I'm like, I cannot believe how addicted to it I was. Like I have no craving whatsoever. It's so freeing to know that you can get past really hard things.
Yeah, and I imagine now it's tough for kids because it is like legal and it's very accessible. It's pretty easy to get. And then there's not a lot of like, I think, data that's come out on it. I mean, I haven't really seen any kind of, I mean, at least personally seen anything that's been like, yeah, vaping is, I mean, obviously people know that vaping is really bad for you, but there hasn't been this like onslaught of info like there has been with like alcohol and other drugs, right? About the dangers of it. Obviously you're a parent. Like, what is your message to other parents who are saying, oh, like, at least so-and-so is not an alcoholic. At least so-and-so is not like smoking weed every day. Like, what's your message to parents who have like a teenager that might be vaping?
Ugh, I mean, yes. Okay. So alcohol or drugs will give you a quicker demise, and the destruction that it brings to your life will be more visible right away. But if you are a child, which you are when you're 16, 17, 15, some of these kids start vaping when they're just in middle school, and you start having an addiction to nicotine, you are becoming, you're a weaker person just overall. Now your baseline for managing stress, your baseline for happiness, for your perseverance, for your ability to get over things and move on, and all the things that like you need to develop as those skills when you're a young child, they're diminished, and you're starting at a deficit, which is just so sad to think about. These kids who, life is hard, and they're going to go through breakups, and they're going to, start a new job or a first time job, and to have to navigate life through being a slave to a drug in order to just feel happy is horrible. And no parent would ever wish that on their child.
And so shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to talk about like dating. I know that's, as I've seen through your podcast, that's something that I mean, hasn't, I guess, been easy as of late. I mean, I read that you dated a guy who had like a double life. There was some drama around that. So like, talk about dating and what it's been like for you post divorce.
Yeah, dating's been interesting. I think what I've realized now is I don't really want to be in a relationship. And so these dating experiences that I have been attracting are with people who also are not ready for a relationship, or or maybe they think they are and they're definitely not. Yeah, one guy without that was, I mean, that was great content, I'm not gonna lie. Luckily none of these guys I've been in love with, so I'm not brokenhearted. But there was one guy who I fully met on Raya, which is a dating app, and it turned out that he was a full-on con artist. We actually had a lot of fun together. Like, he was really funny. I mean, that's the thing. They're very charming. His personality was over the top and he had a lot of energy. I mean, you got to know if you're trying to juggle multiple families. But anyway, we dated by dated, I mean, like we were like talking and going on dates for about 3 months. Nothing serious, but yeah, I ended up finding out that he was actually like married with kids. It was just mind blowing to me that's like, why would anybody actually want to, isn't it hard enough to have one family?
But then you find out because he like had photos he sent to you that were like years old. Like I mean, I think this is an interesting story of how like you found out all this.
Yeah. So we were supposed to go on a trip together and he canceled last minute. And he was like, sorry, I can't go. My son is in the hospital. And I was like, oh no. And he sent me a picture of an x-ray for saying that his son had a broken arm. And then I zoomed in on the x-ray and the date was from like 3 years prior. So I kind of play with it. I'm like, oh my God, wow. Let me see, like, FaceTime me. Let me see like how he is and what's going on. And I want to see the hospital. He wouldn't pick up my FaceTime calls. I knew that he had 2 kids, but he said that the baby mama like lived down the street or whatever. And I knew who she was. I knew who she was on Instagram. So I DM'd her. And I was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I heard what happened to your son. Let me know if I can do anything. She's like, what are you talking about? My son's fine. Like, we're all home. I was like, what's your phone number? I need to call you. So I end up calling her and, she's like, they all live together. They're a really happy family. She had no idea what I was talking about. So obviously we both had a lot of information to share with each other. And yeah, I don't know. I think they're still together. I have no idea. I haven't revealed this guy's name and I won't ever, just because he has kids. Unfortunately, he's not really that uncommon. I feel like this has happened before. I've heard this story, usually on Dateline, and luckily nobody ended up dead, but I don't know.
Yeah, I interviewed Tara Newell, who was like part of the Dirty John story.
I was just thinking Dirty John in my head.
Yeah. And her mom dated this con artist, but I mean, I don't know if your story would have continued if it would have ended up.
Can you imagine? Isn't she the one did she stab him or something? Like, yeah. Oh, that was the girl you interviewed her?
She defended herself and like had to stab this guy because he like.
What a badass.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to kill her.
Yeah. And she had been like, they had uncovered the fact that this guy was a con artist and he really wasn't who he said he was. And so when I hear like your story and sharing that, it reminds me of that, and the fact that you're saying that it's more common than people think. I think it's scary for people, especially given like, people are already like timid about the modern dating world as is, because they're like, how do I navigate the online space? How do I tell who's who? Like all these things. And now you got to worry about meeting somebody that could potentially just create this massive lie.
Yeah. It's like, you just have to believe people's profiles. And back in the day, it was like, you got set up organically, or you at least had somebody to vouch for them, to vet them. The creepiest part about this whole situation is that I actually was in contact with this guy's mom. Like, we were on like a group text for some reason. I don't know. So I hadn't met his mom, but like his mom knew that he was doing this. Didn't say anything. I don't think maybe she didn't like the wife or something. I don't know why she would have been okay with it, but.
So when you DM'd his baby's mama, was that the first time? Did she know who you were or no?
No, she didn't know who I was.
Oh,
not at all.
That's wild.
And then, of course, he flipped it where he was like, this girl's crazy. I've never heard of her in my life, whatever. And then she finds like emails and all the stuff like from all, tickets to Disneyland, tickets to whatever, all the things that we had done together. We went to the Super Bowl together.
I guess my follow-up question is, given that there was a kind of a nasty press cycle about you, I know you said you're like very comfortable with your stuff being out there because you're like, you know what, like this is my life. This is what we do. Like, what's your advice to somebody who isn't as comfortable as you with like what people are saying about them? Like, how do they get better at that? Because not everyone's built like, there's a lot of people that would see like that press cycle and be like, oh my gosh, I'm never leaving my house for the next like 3 months. You know what I mean?
I think, and I'm not impervious to negative feedback. Nobody enjoys hearing bad things about themselves. But I think if you can just try to remember the humanity in everybody and that nobody's perfect, everybody makes mistakes. And I think one of the things that allows me to be resilient is that I'm always willing to pivot and to try something new and to be like, okay, I don't know everything. I'm not supposed to know everything. And I'm willing to try things out. Most of the time they don't work. Sometimes they do. And I think that's inspiring for other people if you're willing to kind of be the guinea pig in that way, because everybody falls, and whether or not somebody sees you or not is, it doesn't have any bearing on the consequence. But also, like, not everybody is built to be an example for other people with their own life experiences. I wouldn't expect that of everybody either. But I feel like if you're feeling, taken down by nasty comments or trolls, or you're feeling like it's weighing on your self-esteem, then I definitely think the best advice for that is just to protect yourself and get yourself out of the places that you don't feel comfortable. There's been I think I made a comment on something Diet Prada posted the other day, and people were not happy about the comment that I made. And I ended up taking it down like an hour after, because I was like, usually I don't like to take down my comments because I don't want to feel like I've been defeated. But sometimes you just have to realize that, like, if you don't feel like dealing with negative comments or feedback from people, then remove yourself. You don't need to do anything you don't want to do. So don't engage, and then just know that something else more salacious is always going to happen, and no one's going to remember you anymore. You're not that important. I think one of my things is like, I also am very grounded. Like, I try to always remind myself and other people, aka my sisters, I'm like, you don't matter that much. You matter because you're helping people. Because you can be of help to people, but like, the world is so vast. There's so many people in it. Your problems are not that important. You need to get over yourself a little bit. That's what I try to tell myself when I'm like thinking that anything in my life is a big deal, because, it doesn't have to be.
Do you think that some of these like wild dating stories that you've experienced, and I've heard other people who live in LA, crazy dating experiences, do you think that's just like an LA thing given the nature of the city, or do you think it exists across the country?
I don't know, because I've only ever dated in LA, I guess. I was married, and then I was in a relationship for a long time before that. But I did see something, I don't know, was it like People magazine or somebody put out a study that was like, LA is just been voted like the number one worst city to date in. And I don't know. I think Raya is like the microcosm of dating in LA, because it's all just like, you need to like get in, and it's supposed to be like it's all creatives who are in it. And with that, I think comes a little bit of an ego and a little bit of a look at me, and I'm important because of X, Y, and Z. And I do think that anytime that your ego is taking the front and center stage, it's a recipe for disaster. But I think that there's many people who are happily in love and met their spouses in LA. I know a lot of them. So I think you attract what you put out, honestly.
And I think I was Jared Freed. Somebody came on the podcast and said that Raya is like a club everyone wants to get into where no one dances.
Literally, nobody's dancing.
Yeah, I met my girlfriend on Hinge, so I've had a positive experience. I would say with like online dating apps as of now, but like I've never done it in LA, and I've heard horrible stories about dating in LA through some of these dating apps, because I think, like, from what I understand, everyone's always looking for the next best thing. Like, it's a city where people are trying to keep up with everybody and look a certain way, and you're always looking for the next best thing to see if you stack up against the people around you. I'm not saying that this is everyone, but I would imagine that happens a lot.
It's definitely a competitive city. People are fighting for jobs. People are fighting for parking spots. And I think there's a culture to that. And I think because it's competitive and it's creative, a lot of people, like, their business is themselves. They are their brand. So remaining relevant, remaining, new and on the pulse and that's kind of, it's part of the culture here. And I do think that probably it definitely comes into your dating situation, because for me, at least, I have a podcast where my dating life is part of the show, because it's part of my life content, and my personality is the show. And so, am I making space for a private relationship by having like a public podcast? Probably not, but that's a choice that I'm making right now. So I think it's all about the choices that you make, and you got to know that there's consequences to them, and you got to live with the consequences. And if you're okay with them, then I think that's fine.
I heard you say, like, you attract what you put out there, and like you kind of were in a place where you weren't really looking for a relationship, and so you met other people that weren't acting like they were looking for a relationship or behaving in a way that they clearly didn't want a relationship. But I would imagine, like, at some point you do want a relationship and potentially to settle down again. Like, what work do you think you have to do on yourself, or are you doing on yourself, so that you can get to a place where you're attracting like the right person?
I think I'm no longer kind of looking for a relationship at all. So what work am I doing? I mean, I'm always doing work on myself. I'm trying to, I'm doing everything from like neurofeedback to heal early childhood traumas to, I'm a very spiritual person, and I try to practice like my relationship with God and the universe. And I read and I pray, and I'm trying to tune in and be as centered and the best version of myself as possible. I think I have been making progress with it. I think sometimes you look at your life and it's kind of like a cha-cha, like you're not like, yeah, I took a step back with the vaping thing, but you know what? Like, I don't drink anymore. So it's like, I'm working out all the time. I think slowly but surely, if we are putting more effort into doing good than bad, we are on the right track. And I think for me, do I want a relationship? Sure. But I think right now, I also know that it's not where I'm able to put most of my energy. And that's because, I have 2 kids who I care about spending my time with. And I also have my work, and that's what I'm wanting to put more of my time towards. So I think it's just knowing, like, being clear about what you want. And honestly, these are like things that I've just started realizing. I didn't really realize that. I think people, myself too, like the culture tells you should be in a relationship, but maybe actually that's not what I really want. And that's kind of what I've figured out right now, that I do enjoy my independence, and I have my whole life to be in a relationship. So maybe I should just be enjoying not being in a relationship.
Yeah, and I think it can be a slippery slope for some people. I mean, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying like where people then like make their identity like being single, like, oh, I'm so happy that I'm single. I'm so happy. You know what I mean? And then it's like, really? Like,
no, I know. Oh, okay. Yeah. I do kind of see, this is new for me because I just today started being like, I don't want to be in a relationship. So, but yeah, I agree with you. I'm usually not happy being like, I'm always looking for that special partnership. So I think it's harder work for me to be like, oh, I want to be single. I'm fine on my own. I think it's hard also for single women to not be so in their masculine. Like if I'm responsible for making all my own money and I'm responsible for my family, I'm responsible. It's hard to balance that masculine feminine energy. But I do think sometimes it's okay to be like, I'm going to be more in my masculine right now. I'm in that phase. And because of that, I probably am not going to be attracting a relationship.
and you mentioned like the podcast has been a big part of your life over the last few years, and it's been really cool to watch it grow. Like, what are some of the biggest lessons or episodes that have stuck out to you the most?
Oh man, this podcast has been such a lesson in learning, and it's really a reflection of all the things that I'm so interested in, which has made me also realize that, like, wow, it's like my brain is all over the place. But some of my favorite guests, man, so Vanessa and Xander are these sex experts. They have an account on Instagram where they talk all about like how to keep sex spicy and your relationship with your partner, which is interesting because I'm not in a relationship, but that was one of my favorite episodes. The glucose goddess I had on, who's amazing. These are just, I think I'm on episode like might be in my 70s or 80s or something. So there's been so many people, but lately I've had on people more in like the spiritual realm. Like I had on a guy the other day who talks about Jewish mysticism called Kabbalah, which is really cool. So I think basically with my podcast, it's like trying to optimize your inner and outer world, your spiritual world, your physical world. And then of course there is the 10 minutes in the beginning of every episode where we're talking about my dating life, which honestly has just been so much it's been fun content because interacting with people in the dating world is just, you gotta laugh. I mean, there's been so much funny things and all relationships, whether it's like one date or, years relationship, it's just a reflection of you and what you're putting out. So I think that's been the most interesting thing to talk about on my podcast. Because it's like, what have I learned from this short stint with this one guy? It's like, okay, well, I guess I'm this, everything that I'm learning from these dates are about me, what I'm putting out there. And the thing is, it's not about me. It's about all of us. Like we all have these tendencies. So I think that's what's fun for people to listen to, because you can kind of see a little bit of yourself in other people when you listen to their stories.
Are people like intimidated by you think, because they know you have like a public persona, you have a podcast? Have you had people say that like on dates?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're intimidated. I definitely think, every single time I go out with somebody, they're like, oh, are you going to talk about this on the podcast? Now I ask them, like, do you not want me to? I either don't get a straight answer or like they prefer to be anonymous, which is fine. Most of my friends are like, Aurora, you're never going to find a boyfriend if you keep talking about your dating experiences on your podcast. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I think right now I'm willing to take that, because I also feel like the guy that I do end up with is going to be, this is a part of, I like to share. Of course, I'll respect certain things that people don't want to share, but I just don't, it goes back to that thing of like, just feeling like you matter more than you do. I need somebody who's not going to take themselves that seriously, because obviously if I'm in a relationship with you, because I'm not a shitty person. I'm not going to just be like airing our dirty laundry and talking shit about you on my podcast. That's not how it goes. I tell funny stories, usually at my own expense, not at anybody else's. Like even with the guy who was the con artist, I was just saying he was fun and had a great personality. It's just that one part about him being a psychopath. Like, can't have everything.
Anything like recently that has come up that was like a funny dating story?
Yeah, I went on a fourth date and he took me to this restaurant at a hotel and then he disappeared and he wasn't around for like 15 minutes and some guy walks by and drops a room key on the table. And I'm like, this is the most presumptuous, aggressive move. And I was like, is this like my like hint that I'm supposed to go find this room in this hotel with this guy who I did not say I wanted to get a room in a hotel with? So that was funny.
And did you go?
I went to the room. Yeah. I went up to him, but I was just like, I yelled at him. I was like, first of all, you left me. Second of all, in what world do you surprise a girl with a hotel room on a fourth date? Like, absolutely not. But he was really cute. We also did this earlier in the night. We had this, have you ever seen an Instagram where you paint the person in front of you and then show them your painting? We did that earlier in the date. And then we went to that restaurant and then he surprised me with the hotel room, which I thought it was a really bold move. And it definitely made it to my podcast.
They call it having Riz now, I've learned recently.
What's Riz?
Like charisma. I've heard that's what the younger generation calls.
Charisma is when you assume women want to spend the night with you.
Well, no, I'm just saying, if you said it was a bold move because you guys had this amazing thing where you painted each other and then he just drops a hotel key and then you like go up to his room. It did work, right? That's what I'm saying. It worked.
Could have landed. It could have. The thing is, if we really liked each other more, if there was more chemistry, I might have reacted differently to it. But I think that's why dating is just so delicate and awkward and funny, because it's like, you kind of are trying to read somebody, like, are they into it? Are they not? And then you got to make moves. Some of them fall flat. Some of them are not taking the way you thought that they would be taken. And there's just a lot of content in dating. This is why I can't give it up.
Right. Well, Aurora, this has been awesome. I appreciate you coming back on the pod. Really appreciate your vulnerability. I think the audience is going to really get a lot of value out of this. If people want to connect with you online, if they're not already, they want to listen to your podcast, where's the best place to do so?
You can listen to my podcast called Barely Filtered. And that is on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you stream your podcast, or in YouTube. And the YouTube, you can get the full video versions as well as short clips. And then you can find me Aurora Culpo on Instagram.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. And like I said, I think the audience is going to love this one.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.